Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now, have you ever wondered what the future world of work holds for you? Well, my guest today might have very many of those clues because he's Gi Fernando. He's an engineer, entrepreneur and investor. Gi has built technology businesses that have sold for literally millions, and he was an early financial backer of Citymapper. And you know what? He's also helped thousands of UK workers view tech as teammate, not Terminator. And guess what? It all began in a pub with a £6 bet. Let's find out more. Gi, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us all about that £6 steak.
Yeah, it was a bar, and it was a friend of mine who later turned out to be my business partner, and another friend, Claire, who worked in advertising.
Right, so you were goaded to see what you could do with a £6?
Well, we actually had run out of money, and so she made a bet.
Right.
With us, and we couldn't start a business which drew in about £20,000 in 5 days.
So what did you see? So tell us the story of that week.
Myself and my business partner to be were thinking about Facebook at the time and Facebook apps. We thought this is quite handy. This was, back in the day. And my friend Claire, shout out to Claire, who was like, load of rubbish. And so we made a bet. And
so tell us where you finished up. What did that £6 bet grow into?
That grew into a company called Techlightment, which then sold to Experian.
Can you tell us for how much? Or
it was tens of millions, yeah.
Okay, so that's not a bad return on
that is
on the £6 bet. So tell us a bit about Techlightment in terms of the actual business. You sold it to Experian,
yeah,
I believe.
We did.
Tell us a little bit about how that went.
Well, it was a great little business. Apart from the name Techlightment, just imagine going to hotel lobbies or receptions for companies saying I work for Techlightment. It was rubbish naming, but apart from that, we built apps to start with. As part of advertising campaigns, Facebook apps, which kind of went quite viral.
So it was a digital advertising business?
It was a digital advertising business to start with, but at the back end of it, kind of the insight around how people use those apps became our core calling card. Then we built an advertising platform which did the ads to get more users into the apps, and you created this lovely circle.
So give us a sense of that business. Exciting place to be?
It was crazy. I mean, this is in the early days of Facebook. We were a London company against people in Silicon Valley building out their businesses around Facebook's ecosystem, and we were beating them by a country mile.
And you were one of the first faces of the Silicon Roundabout wired feature, were you not?
We were one of the 10 in there in the roundabout.
Were you in a big shining office, or
it was an office which was very chic because we started.
Very what, chic or cheap?
Cheap and chic. But it was in the days when it was £8 a square foot in Shoreditch, right? And Shoreditch was a little bit more grungy than trendy. And so I got an office there for £8 a square foot, 5-year lease. Lovely.
So you were one of the pioneers?
Yeah, right at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, and today, obviously, you've gone on to wear a lot of hats. I mean, I've just written them down here: thinker to investor, entrepreneur to engineer, non-exec to advisor. I mean, in the words of the song, will the real Gi please stand up? Don't do that, by the way. What are you now? Are you do you see yourself as an entrepreneur still, or are you one of these other things first and foremost?
It's a funny thing, isn't it? I think I've always been an entrepreneur. It's just I only kind of knew it when an entrepreneur became a thing. You know, when I was leaving university, I didn't really know what I was.
Because you were a science major, right?
I engineer.
Engineer,
and then, my parents didn't really, my dad's a doctor. My mum worked for the Commission for Racial Equality.
I heard they suspected you of earning your living by, in your words, nefarious means.
I think so. I think they wondered how I made my money, and I was out late at night, and I think they might have thought.
What did they make of this choice to become self-employed, taking on a £6 bet, living a life just full of risk? What was your parents' response to that?
They didn't quite understand it at the time, but I mean, it started earlier after university. I mean, in 1992 when I graduated, it was a recession, and I could not get a job, frankly. I don't know, over 100 accountancy firms I applied for, all of whom said no. One of them said, really, you shouldn't even think about this industry.
So you wanted to be an accountant first?
I didn't. My parents thought I should be. Accountant, doctor, engineer.
So get a proper job.
Proper job. Lawyer.
Yeah. And so when you told them, I'm going to become an entrepreneur or whatever, you said, what was the...
Well, it wasn't even that. It was, how do I pay my rent? So I sold health insurance door to door and used that money to build a tech device.
So necessity really did lead to invention?
Totally necessity, yeah.
And in terms of what you learnt about yourself in terms of Gi the entrepreneur, how resourceful did you have to become to actually make it work?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, really, knocking on doors, selling health insurance was probably the best thing and the worst thing that happened to me. The best thing was you realise that you knock on 100 doors and 2 people let you in and pay you money. Right? And doing that day in, day out to earn enough money to pay your rent is a significant thing. And I'm a techie. So now, all of a sudden, I'm a techie who can write code and I can sell.
That's a pretty good skill set.
That's a good skill set, right? So all of a sudden, that fusion, that hybridization, I think that just kind of launched me into kind of assessing risk and the world differently, because then you think, I'm going to invent something, but then I'm thinking about selling it as well.
I mean, let's stick with that story of risk, because something that you've become very well known for in campaigning circles is the future world of work and how it's going to affect us all. I mean, a lot of what you read doesn't sort of fill you with confidence in terms of the arrival of AI and technology and the replacement of people with machines. I mean, how much of that is hype, do you think, and how much of that is a very real threat to the future livelihood of people?
Well, I think it's a real... You can't look at these things just in kind of one or the other, or in macro, because yes, there are going to be loads of current activities called jobs replaced by new stuff. Now the issue is, can you get people to adapt to do something else?
And the new stuff being new jobs.
New jobs, new work, new ways of working, using new tools, new ways of communicating, using new tools, new ways of managing, new ways of leading. So can people who are doing the old ways of doing that, because they've got new tools and ways of doing things, do the new stuff fast enough? That becomes the problem.
But when you see something like the Centre for Cities Research, which says that 1 in 5 jobs in British cities might be gone by 2030, can that technological turn of the wheel, can that change create enough new jobs to replace these ones that might be destroyed? I
think there will be more than enough jobs created to the ones lost, but the transition is the issue. Can the people... Can people working in a branch, working in a store, the vast kind of middle classes, can they adapt fast enough? Can the companies that employ them help them?
It's interesting, you say the middle classes. So these are the people that are most at risk here, is it?
I think so.
Right. And in terms of what happens next, what should be happening? What can be done? What's the call out?
Well, I think the call out, it is reskilling, but I think we need to think deeper than just knowledge. So I think we're stuck in a kind of 14th century word of a job. Job is about having knowledge for doing a thing.
14th century.
Yeah, 14th.
It's got a few hundred years to catch up then.
Yeah. So I really do, because the fact is, if we build a world where you kind of do the same job for 20 years and then retire and then die, right? Then the education system supports that. Progression inside companies supports that. And of course, that world is gone. It's gone.
I mean, you mentioned education.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of time spent teaching kids to code, trying to get to grips with this. Is that the right way forward?
I think that's just one portion of it, because all of those skills are to do with learning knowledge of how to do something, how to program. There's a whole other set around how you behave. Ways of working, ways of collaborating, your attributes, right? You're human. What's called soft skills, right? That is the premium. If you think about all this knowledge stuff is going to be commoditized to hell by technology, then you've got to think, what's the value? What's the premium?
So your answer is we have to be more human as human beings rather than more technology efficient.
It's almost digital is almost like tech plus human, right? So that's what it means. It means new ways of working, communicating, collaborating, using tools which are new, which change, and that means you fuse those two together and you be comfortable around handling things differently, and then you're good.
And can you give us a sense of how far either on the pace or off the pace we are in terms of being match fit for this new world that requires us to be more empathetic, better attitudes, presumably lots of different things to be ready for this change? I mean, how much has to be done?
I think a huge amount needs to be done, but I think it's almost like changing the question slightly. It's like, it's better to be over-prepared, given where we are at the moment, because we're dealing with people's lives, right? So if you have a whole bunch of people in kind of traditional jobs who are actually been working on the same thing for 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, have kids, expecting to have the same job in another 8 years. That won't happen.
And just, I mean, we're heading to the break, but in terms of who gets us prepared, I mean, is this the traditional job for the state, or is it business, or are there other actors that are going to come into play here?
I think it needs to be, I think the state needs to get involved, but move from just reskilling, meaning re-knowledging, to kind of changing how people work and the way they work. I think it's employers need to take responsibility, because frankly, I mean, this is what we're finding. If they take responsibility for having better workers, using their investment in technology to make sure people are actually using that technology to do things differently, then actually they end up making more money.
Right. So let's hold that point on business, because we're going to have to go to the break, and when we return, we'll look indeed at what it takes to build a great business brand and what that means for the very future of our commercial enterprises. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest today is the entrepreneur and investor Gi Fernando. Now, Gi, before the break, we had got on to a little bit about the purpose of business, the role of business. It's interesting that the chief executive of Salesforce, massive technology company, Mark Benioff, he's recently warned that tech companies were facing a moment in time to define their values. We've often heard this phrase, the techlash, in the last 12 months, that actually people are losing their love of technology. Are these the companies that should really be sorting out this big disruption in the world of work and the world of change?
Yes, they have the opportunity to do so. They have massive reach, massive power, massive resources, and they absolutely should be part of the answer.
What are they not doing at the moment?
I think one of the real reasons, as a whole, I think, is we don't seem to think about people's emotions in this, their mindset, right? If people feel that they don't have any agency over their futures, no control over their futures, because everything's happening too quickly and they don't know what to do, they don't feel in control, then people behave very weirdly. It doesn't matter how much they know, if they feel they're not on top of predicting their own futures, they have a problem.
So is tech making us feel more insecure?
I think it can do, and it is doing, because there's a lot of change happening, and tech is driving that change. And when things change, if you feel very comfortable in yourself with change, that's great. But I think there's a whole system issue around how all of the systems of politics, of education, of progression in companies are built for a fast-changing world.
But it's interesting. These guys are not. They're not the tobacco manufacturers or the oil majors. These are and were supposed to be the shining beacons, the people that were going to make things better. How are they getting it wrong, do you think? Why are they getting it wrong?
I think one of the things that I don't even think it's getting it wrong. It's just unforeseen things have happened, right? So it's unexpected results of getting to such scale and whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right? And you shouldn't do anything about it.
So this is part of their own accelerated journey and accelerating our lives. So things are just going too quickly.
Things are going quickly and they're going to get faster. So if they're too quickly now, then imagine what it's going to be like in 10 years.
It's funny, I interviewed one technologist who said something very similar. He said, we're going to look back on this era in about 10 years' time and say, they were so slow.
Slow. Yeah, I think so. And it's a makeup of things. You can do things with software really quickly when you have tools which make you be able to do that even faster and cheaper, and connectivity is even easier. Things are going to appear faster.
But they've created, a lot of these big technology majors have created these sort of bubbles of privilege. You look at sort of the West Coast businesses like Google and others. I mean, it's almost as if these companies are somehow living above and beyond society. When you look at things like the new Apple building, do these companies need to get a bit back in there with society? And if so, how do they do that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting point. I mean, the issue is, I think a good way to explain it is when people talk about open and free, it doesn't necessarily mean accessible, right? There's how much online learning. You could go off tomorrow and learn machine learning for free from Stanford. I challenge anyone from a certain area around the US or the UK to go to that course and within 3 seconds go, that's not for me, right? Because they'll just see it and go, oh my God, this is not for me, just because the language used. When people kind of from one of those big 4 tech companies go education, you can just Google that. Well, it presupposes that the language the stuff is written in is accessible for everyone.
So, so presumably that's an addressable issue then?
It is absolutely addressable, but you have to realise it to address it. Right?
I mean, you said that profit and purpose should be so closely connected that one cannot exist without the other. Is this a good example of where you could build better businesses by making the net more accessible?
You can. Absolutely. It's a lockstep, right? So you go, right, rather than focus on this audience that you can make money on, you can also make money for the other 90% by making it accessible to them. Just like, when we had all those rules around accessibility for the web, accessibility meaning, readers and for the blind and things like that, that actually made the structure of websites actually better. Right? Now we're talking about the grammar, the language used, the nuance around making it accessible to different types of people. It's a bigger market.
And you see some amazing things that companies like Microsoft and others are doing for the visually impaired and for others in terms of opening up technology. Yet somehow into the popular mindset has come the idea that technology actually takes things from us, doesn't necessarily give us, taking more jobs, taking more opportunities away. Is that an addressable problem by these vast organisations that are powering ahead and building the future?
Absolutely it is. You just want to think, who might this new innovation put at risk? How can we build an economically sustainable model that tries to help those people re-enter and be part of the right kind of direction?
And as somebody that built a highly successful business in opening up advertising on platforms like Facebook, when you look at things like Cambridge Analytica, the accusations of exploitation and manipulation that this sort of advertising brings, how do you feel personally about that?
Well, I think it's interesting, the Cambridge Analytica thing. There's 2 things going on. There was a lot of illegal stuff that was allegedly happened, like bribery and things like that, which is illegal wherever you are. And then there's stuff with data, which I don't think actually that was the right story, because there was some data. It was static data. And where you actually get your margin from was when people change states, because you're doing this one time, then you're doing another. That is really interesting.
But the central queasiness is that these organisations hold, haven't given permission. You're holding profiles about what I might buy, how I might behave. I mean, that's what people are worried about, isn't it?
They are, and they're quite right to be worried about it, because obviously that data, just like, let's take an extreme case, health data. Who should own my health data? Me!
Do you think that, some technologists are saying that there should almost be like the equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm?
Absolutely.
Is that where technologists should be sort of thinking about taking their activities?
I've been talking about this from an engineer. I'm an engineer, right, ultimately. I think, like in Canada, if you're an engineer building bridges or something, you kind of have to swear in almost like a Hippocratic Oath, and you wear an iron ring and all that sort of stuff. I think if you're doing engineering from when you're 5, anything to do with software, computing curriculum, anything, you need to be thinking about the ethics and the unforeseen circumstances of history where new technology has created an issue, and it should be drilled into you, and then when you graduate from your degree, you have a Hippocratic Oath.
So there is a responsibility here.
Absolutely.
And at the moment, you see a lot of technologists almost think it's their right to develop automated humans or digital humans on the web, sentient technologies. I mean, are we at that point where the ethics are so big, the questions are so potentially sort of far-reaching that there needs to be a new contract with these big companies?
I agree. I think we're at a great opportunistic position, because we're starting to see a tide of people thinking about ethics and responsibility and responsible leadership and purpose, which is brilliant. It's a great antidote, because you've got these kind of one side thinking about that and the other side going, well, I don't really care much, really.
But then also for a lot of people, this stuff just flies over their head, because Facebook's the way I keep in touch with my mum and dad.
Exactly. So not everyone thinks like we do.
Or you do.
Or I do, yeah, exactly. And so I think, but understanding some other things they might not tell you, it might not be their data, but it's like, if they don't know what they don't know, like the consequences of that data, they might not have a clue about it. They see something in the news, but they're like, well, I don't know.
It all comes back to movies, doesn't it? This sounds like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, this is what we're talking about, right?
I think engineers...
Actually, hugely powerful companies need to be more responsible.
But also, people building stuff, right? Because it's all down to humans at the end. If you are building something, whatever it is, a bridge, some software, whatever, you should feel, or you're a doctor healing someone, you should feel and think about what if this got into the wrong hands, did something else. Because, being an engineer, I feel great power and great responsibility. I can build something and get users using it, without thinking about it. And that's the issue.
And presumably, also, this is about future talent and betting on the values and if you like, the motivations for why young people might actually take careers with some of these firms.
Absolutely right. And talent is the key, right? Because we're going for a generation who's going to be really thinking about purpose, and as a lot of stats analysis say, and if you want really good talent, you need to be thinking about that.
Well, I mean, I can't literally give it to you because obviously there's an anti-bribery act in place, but if I was to give you £6 now and you retain your wager, what are you going to bet on?
I would bet on businesses which actually do kind of service people, social workers, looking after the elderly with technology.
So in the public space?
In the public space, I would.
And do you think enough entrepreneurs see that actually the big goal might be the transformation of public services through tech?
I'm not sure. I think they think about it, but the economics are kind of slightly further out. This is the trouble, right? It's not a get rich quick, like my bet previously, and that may be because I've learnt a little bit more and I've got a bit more money. But now I think if I was to put my £6 bet, I want something which lasts longer and makes more of an impact to the world.
Well, I think that's a message for our political leaders in terms of open the doors to more entrepreneurs like you, Gi. So thank you very much for coming on the show. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We've talked a lot of different things here, but actually we've got to say thank you and go, because it's time to say goodbye to Gi, whose story reminds us to see the good in tech. You know what? It's all felt a bit like another movie, Star Wars. There's much to fear from the dark side of the Force, but hope springs eternal in this particular story. It's one where people and machines help, not hinder, and that should build a new hope for a galaxy that's not that far away. I'll see you for the next edition of The Capital Conversation. See you soon.